How a Jewish Immigrant Destroyed Rockefeller. October 1892. A single ship cuts through the Suez Canal, carrying 4,000 tons of Russian kerosene in its belly. Most people think this is just another cargo vessel. They're wrong. This ship is a financial weapon. It's about to collapse the most powerful monopoly the world has ever seen. John D. Rockefeller controlled 95% of global oil. He owned the refineries, the pipelines, the railroads, and the politicians. But he didn't own the one thing that mattered most. He didn't own the cost of moving oil across oceans. That October morning, a Jewish immigrant named Marcus Samuel proved that empires aren't built on oil fields. They're built on ledgers. And whoever controls transport costs controls the balance sheet. Rockefeller was about to learn that the hard way. Let's rewind for a moment. Picture Standard Oil in 1890. It's not just a company. It's a machine that devours competitors like a steel grinder crushes bone. Rockefeller's refineries process 80% of America's crude. His trains move it cheaper than anyone else. His marketing teams flood every town with kerosene lamps branded with his logo. The man operates like a central bank with oil instead of currency. He can flood markets to bankrupt rivals, then buy their assets for pennies. He's done it dozens of times. Wall Street calls him the Colossus. Newspapers call him a tyrant. But the ledger calls him profitable. His company prints money faster than the U.S. Treasury. Dividends flow like crude from a Texas gusher. Shareholders worship him. Politicians fear him. But monopolies have a fatal flaw. They optimize for control, not efficiency. Rockefeller squeezed every supplier, every railroad, every distributor, until they bled. It worked domestically, but overseas his system was bloated and slow. Standard Oil shipped kerosene in wooden barrels. Each barrel cost money to build. Each barrel leaked. Each barrel required manual labor to fill and seal. Then those barrels traveled by rail to ports, then by ship across oceans. The transport alone ate 30% of the final sale price. That's where the margin died. Rockefeller didn't care because he had no competition. Until Marcus Samuel looked at that 30% and saw an opportunity. He saw the one place Rockefeller was vulnerable. The balance sheet doesn't lie. Whoever cuts transport costs wins the market. It's not about oil. It's about arithmetic. Marcus Samuel wasn't born into wealth. His father was an Iraqi Jewish immigrant who sold seashells in London. Yes, actual seashells. Tourists bought them as souvenirs. It was a modest business that kept the family fed but never comfortable. Marcus took over the import-export operation after his father died. He expanded into rice, silk, coal, anything that moved across borders. But he noticed something critical. The real money wasn't in the goods themselves. It was in the efficiency of moving them. A ton of coal shipped cheaply was worth more than 2 tons shipped expensively. That logic became his obsession. In the late 1880s, he started handling consignments of kerosene for Russian oil producers. The Rothschilds had oil fields in Baku and needed someone to sell it in Asia. Samuel studied the supply chain. He saw the bottleneck immediately. The barrels, the ships, the routes. All of it was wasteful and expensive. So he designed something no one had ever built before, a bulk oil tanker. Not a ship with barrels stacked in the hold. A ship where the hull itself was the container. Oil poured directly into massive compartments. No barrels, no leakage, no wasted space. The ship carried 4,000 tons in one trip. That's the equivalent of 80,000 individual barrels. The cost per gallon dropped by more than half. Economies of scale turned into a bludgeon. Samuel wasn't just competing with Rockefeller. He was rewriting the cost structure of the entire industry. The first ship was called the Murex. It launched in 1891. Lloyd's of London gave it the highest safety rating ever issued. That rating mattered because Samuel had a bigger plan. He wanted to use the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal opened in 1869. It cut 4,000 miles off the route to India and the Far East. For oil shippers, it should have been a gold mine. But the canal authorities banned flammable cargo. They feared fire. They feared explosions. They feared lawsuits. Standard Oil couldn't use it. Their barrel system was too dangerous. Samuel saw the gap. If he could prove his tanker was safe, he'd have a monopoly on the shortest route to Asia. He lobbied the canal authorities for months. Finally, they agreed to a trial run. In July 1892, the Murex entered the canal. It carried 4,000 tons of kerosene. It passed through without incident. History changed in that moment. Standard Oil was locked out. Shell was locked in. The impact was immediate and brutal. Samuel could now deliver kerosene to Asia weeks faster than Rockefeller. His transport costs were half of Standard Oil's. He flooded markets in India, China, Japan, and Southeast Asia. He undercut Rockefeller's prices by 20% and still made profit. The ledger told the story. Shell's revenue doubled in 2 years. By 1897, Samuel controlled 70% of seaborne petroleum trade. He had 15 tankers in operation. Each one was a floating profit engine. Rockefeller watched from New York with growing alarm. His overseas sales collapsed. His agents sent panicked telegrams. Shell was bleeding him dry in every market east of Suez. For the first time in his life, Rockefeller faced a competitor he couldn't crush. Samuel wasn't competing on oil. He was competing on cost, and cost is math. You can't bully math. Rockefeller responded the only way he knew how. He slashed prices. Everywhere Shell appeared, Standard Oil flooded the market with cheap kerosene. They sold below cost. They burned cash to starve the competitor. It was the same playbook Rockefeller used to destroy dozens of rivals in America. But Samuel had a lifeline. His transport costs were so low he could survive on margins that would bankrupt others. The price war hurt Shell. It didn't kill Shell. That bought Samuel time, and time bought him opportunity. In 1901, the Spindletop oil field erupted in Texas. It was the largest oil discovery in American history. In its first year, it produced 3.5 million barrels. By the second year, production hit 17 million barrels. Prices collapsed. Oil that once sold for $1 a barrel dropped to 10 cents. Rockefeller's monopoly wobbled. Samuel raced to lock in supply contracts with Texas producers. He pushed Shell directly into the American market. For a brief moment, it looked like total victory. But Spindletop overproduced itself into exhaustion. Within 3 years, the wells started drying up. Half of Shell's fleet sat idle. Samuel had bet big on American oil. The bet failed. Meanwhile, Rockefeller still controlled the refineries, the pipelines, and the capital. He could wait out the storm. Samuel couldn't. By 1902, Shell was bleeding cash. Debt outweighed assets by 2-1. Samuel was also distracted. He'd been elected Lord Mayor of London. For 9 months, he didn't step into Shell's office. When he returned, the company was on the edge of collapse. The balance sheet doesn't care about political titles. It only cares about solvency, and Shell was running out of it. Samuel needed a lifeline. He needed capital. He needed expertise. He needed a merger. The solution came in 1907. Samuel merged Shell with Royal Dutch Petroleum. It was a masterstroke in survival. Royal Dutch had oil fields in the Dutch East Indies. They had refining capacity. They had cash flow. Shell had ships and global distribution. The fit was almost too perfect. Ownership split 60-40. Royal Dutch held the majority. Shell kept 40% and stayed under British law. The combined entity was called Royal Dutch Shell. Within a year, the company was debt-free. It paid a 20% dividend. The merger didn't just save Shell. It created a monster. Royal Dutch Shell now had production, refining, transport, and marketing all under one roof. It was vertical integration on a global scale. Rockefeller had built the same system domestically, but Shell built it across continents. The new company controlled oil fields in Russia, the East Indies, Venezuela, and Mexico. It had refineries in Asia and Europe. It had hundreds of bulk tankers. The cost advantage was insurmountable. By 1910, Royal Dutch Shell was the second largest oil company in the world. Only Standard Oil was bigger. But Standard Oil was crumbling under legal pressure. The U.S. government had finally decided to break the monopoly. Antitrust lawsuits piled up. Journalists exposed Rockefeller's tactics. Public anger reached a boiling point. In 1911, the Supreme Court ordered Standard Oil dissolved under the Sherman Antitrust Act. The company was split into 34 separate entities. Rockefeller's empire was shattered. He kept his wealth, but he lost his control. Meanwhile, Shell kept growing. It expanded into new markets. It developed new oil fields. It built refineries in places Rockefeller had never reached. By the time World War I started in 1914, Shell was supplying fuel for the British Navy. Oil had become a strategic weapon. Navies ran on it. Armies moved on it. Nations rose and fell based on their access to it. Shell was no longer just a company. It was a pillar of British imperial power. Marcus Samuel retired in 1920. Shareholders credited him with transforming Shell into a global giant. He was knighted and elevated to the peerage. He became Viscount Bursted. It was the highest honor a Jewish immigrant could achieve in Britain. Samuel had gone from selling seashells to controlling oil empires. He'd beaten Rockefeller not with oil fields, but with cost accounting. He'd proven that logistics could defeat monopolies. The ledger had won, but the story doesn't end with triumph. It ends with a shadow so dark it rewrites everything Samuel built. Because decades after he died, the company he created collaborated with one of history's greatest evils. Royal Dutch Shell worked with Nazi Germany, and that collaboration killed people. In the 1930s, Shell operated refineries across Europe. When Hitler rose to power, Shell didn't pull out. It stayed. It adapted. It negotiated. Shell's German subsidiary was called Renanio ASAG. Its Austrian branch was called Shell Austria. Both operated under Nazi control during the war, and both used forced labor. Thousands of workers were taken from Poland, the Netherlands, France, and the Soviet Union. They were civilians. They were prisoners. They were slaves. Shell's refineries became labor camps. The workers lived in filthy barracks. They received starvation rations. They worked 12-hour shifts under armed SS guards. They weren't paid. They had no rights. Many of them died, Shell knew. The company's executives received reports. They signed off on operational budgets. They approved supply chains. The refineries kept running. The profits kept flowing. The balance sheet stayed healthy. Shell also helped Nazi Germany create Deutsche Gasoline. It was a state-controlled fuel company designed to manage gasoline distribution for the war effort. Shell shared ownership with IG Farben. That name should make your blood run cold. IG Farben was the chemical conglomerate that produced Zyklon B. That's the poison gas used in concentration camps. Shell was in business with the company that manufactured industrial genocide. Let that sink in for a moment. Marcus Samuel was a Jewish immigrant. His family fled persecution. He built Shell as proof that outsiders could succeed. And decades after his death, his company became complicit in the machinery of the Holocaust. The irony is almost too cruel to process, but it reveals a deeper truth about corporate power. Companies don't have morals. They have balance sheets. When survival or profit is at stake, the ledger becomes the only guide. Ethics become optional. Humanity becomes a cost. After the war, Shell faced investigations. Governments demanded answers. Survivors filed lawsuits. Shell paid some settlements. It issued apologies. But it never fully acknowledged the scale of its complicity. The company argued it had no choice. It claimed Nazi authorities controlled everything. It said local managers made decisions without approval from headquarters. These are the same defenses every corporation uses when caught. They deflect. They compartmentalize. They hide behind legal structures. But the evidence is clear. Shell profited from forced labor. Shell worked with IG Farben. Shell helped fuel the Nazi war machine. Those are facts, not opinions. They exist in documents, in testimony, in the historical record. You can't erase them with public relations. You can't offset them with charity. The stain is permanent. So what do we do with this? How do we reconcile Marcus Samuel's genius with Shell's darkness? The answer is uncomfortable. We recognize that systems outlive their creators. Samuel built Shell to compete with Rockefeller. He built it to survive. And survival became the only value that mattered. When he died in 1927, he left behind a machine optimized for profit and growth. That machine kept running. It didn't ask moral questions. It asked financial questions. Can we extract oil here? Can we refine it cheaper? Can we sell it for more? When the Nazis came to power, Shell answered those questions the same way it always had. Yes, yes. The ledger didn't care about ethics. It cared about returns. And returns kept flowing. This is the real lesson of Marcus Samuel's story. He proved that immigrants could build empires. He proved that innovation beats monopolies. He proved that logistics and cost accounting can reshape industries. But he also proved something darker. Once you build a machine designed only for profit, you lose control of what it does. Samuel destroyed Rockefeller's monopoly. But he created something that became just as ruthless. Shell didn't need a villain to commit atrocities. It just needed incentives. It needed markets. It needed quarterly earnings. The rest happened automatically. Bureaucrats signed forms. Managers optimized operations. Engineers improved efficiency. And people died, not because anyone intended it, but because the system didn't care. Today, Royal Dutch Shell is one of the largest companies on Earth. It brings in more than $300 billion in revenue every year. It operates in more than 70 countries. It employs tens of thousands of people. Most of them have no idea about the company's history during World War II. They just see the logo. They see the paycheck. They see the stock price. The past is buried under layers of corporate restructuring, but it's still there. It's in the archives. It's in the testimonies of survivors. It's in the bank records that show profit flowing from refineries staffed by slaves. History doesn't disappear just because it's uncomfortable. It waits, and eventually someone digs it up. So here's the final truth. Marcus Samuel didn't destroy Rockefeller by being more ethical. He destroyed him by being more efficient. And efficiency is a neutral tool. You can use it to deliver cheap kerosene to poor families in Asia, or you can use it to streamline the logistics of genocide. The ledger doesn't judge, it just records. Samuel's story teaches us that innovation isn't inherently good. Systems aren't inherently moral. Companies aren't inherently evil. They're machines built to optimize for one thing, profit. And when profit is the only goal, humanity becomes a variable, one that can be adjusted, one that can be eliminated, one that can be written off as a cost of doing business. Marcus Samuel started with seashells. He ended with an empire, but empires don't stay in the hands of their founders. They grow, they mutate, they follow incentives wherever they lead. Sometimes they lead to prosperity, sometimes they lead to innovation, and sometimes they lead to collaboration with evil. Because the machine doesn't ask where it's going. It just asks if it's profitable to get there. Follow the money. It always tells the truth, and the truth is often uglier than we want to believe. If you made it this far, you now know something most people don't. You know that the oil industry wasn't built by drillers. It was built by accountants. You know that monopolies don't fall to armies. They fall to better balance sheets. You know that corporate power can enable progress and atrocity in the same breath. These are the lessons history tries to bury. But you can't bury the ledger. The numbers always survive. If you want to stay ahead of the curve and learn the financial secrets that shape the modern world, subscribe to this channel. Most people think history is about kings and generals. You now know better. History is about cash, debt, and resources. Everything else is just theater. Thanks for watching. And remember, sovereignty is solvency. The moment you run out of money, you run out of power. That's not a theory, that's a law. And no one is exempt